Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, how are you doing this week? You well?
Yeah, I'm pretty good.
Marvellous. We have an interesting one for today. We're tackling some of the hardest topics in all of Cube. This week, we have a doozy for us. This week we're going to try and fix Selesnya as a colour pair. I often, when we're doing set reviews and stuff like that, it will come up that Selesnya is often one of the hardest things to work out what to do with when you're building a cube. And we've got some ideas and some decks that kind of like we've played about with ourselves or we've seen in cubes. And today we're going to be talking about them. James, what's your immediate thoughts on Selesnya as a colour pair?
Yeah, I think it certainly can be tricky. If you're not leaning into a very specific archetype with it, it often feels like the default green cards and white cards you will put in most cubes do not gel that well together. So you often, if you want Selesnya to be a little bit more viable, you often kind of have to make a conscious effort to make that happen.
No, 100%. So that's going to be our main topic for today. Before we jump into Selesnya, please firstly consider giving the podcast a like, a thumbs up, a 5-star review really helps us out. And also, a link to all the cards we talk about will be down in the show notes below. There'll be a link to a Mox field. We've chaptered everything out. Everything will be there. So if you want to follow along, we will try and talk about the cards where relevant, but if some we don't mention in full detail, there will be images of them there if you want to see them. There is also the video version. Hello, YouTube, if you're watching there. Also, obviously, there'll be time codes as well down below if you want to jump around to any specific deck. If there's a deck that takes your fancy that you're thinking of running in your cube, you can jump straight to it. That's what the time codes are for. But with that out the way, let's kind of touch on... let's kind of deep dive back a sec. Kind of green-white has tended to struggle as an archetype in cube because the best things that green and white generally do in cubes have classically been opposite of each other. Like, white is traditionally an aggressive colour and it has the best creature removal. Green is really good at ramping and shooting big things into play, and it has some of the best creature-based threats. And it kind of often falls into the trap that kind of like old Boros decks used to fall into, where basically the combination of Selesnya was not as good as, or was not as aggressive or as fast as mono white, or it wasn't as big or as powerful or could cheat things into play as quickly as mono green. Like, do you think that's fair, James?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of it, I think, is down to what curves the decks want to play, right? Like, often the good white creature-based decks are very, very lean, right? Especially in terms of the threats they're playing. You certainly won't see anything above 4, and not that like only the premium 4s, right? Whereas green tends to be more about, the threats of almost starting at 4, right? They because they want to lead on an elf early and then accelerate into those slightly higher curve threats. It's not to say you can't have aggressive green decks. You absolutely can. Look at like red-green, for example, works really well in that way. But it's not beating down with 2-drops, really. And that's the thing the white creature decks are good at, is 2-drops into removal. They don't want to be playing like big chunky threats into the late game, really.
No, definitely. But it is something that as the curve of cubes, like as we talked about in our last episode, comparing the 2016 cube to the 2026 cube, curves are coming down. So as threats, like as the best creatures are moving down from 5 and 6 mana to 2, 3, 4 mana, going elf into a threat does become a bit more achievable. Like, do you think that's do you think the way the curves are going, James, will, or do you think the way new cards are being printed is kind of could mean that Selesnya has more game going forward in a similar way to how Boros has improved tremendously as a color pair over the last couple of years? Like Selesnya, like it does have some cool things it can do.
Yeah, for sure. There is a game plan there, right? It tends to be taking the good 3 and 4 mana plays from white, combining it with a little bit of acceleration from green. Plus, you can be playing your questing beasts and whatnot for green. And you play a temporary game, and plus, you're good at splashing, right? So it can be like the basis of a sort of multicolor aggressive-ish deck. I think the first Cube Clash we played, the finals draft, I ended up pivoting a lot and ending up in Selesnya, and it was pretty good actually. Like, it's just like really good mana. You could just get out a turn 2 Adeline off an elf, and then there's Parallax Wave. And these things are really potent when you get them out a turn early. But it does feel like a lot needs to come together for that to be the right place to be in a draft. It also has the issue, I find, that a lot of the really good white cards you want in that deck have multiple white pips. And obviously, if you're trying to cast an elf on turn 1, you need a lot of green mana in your deck. So you often need really, really good fixing to get the deck to work. Plus, you can't really play tap lands, right, if you're trying to play an elf on 1. So it puts sort of a lot of pressure on your mana base to get those sort of untapped jewels and fetches.
Yeah, definitely. As we go through the episode, we are going to be touching on some decks that we think, like, basically, when we might struggle with from a consistency and power level point of view, we might be able to regain with some synergy, and that's kind of what we're trying to do by pulling these archetypes together. Before we kind of get into the specific ones we want to talk about today, there are some honorable mentions. These are some really cool decks that we have. I think all but one of these I am currently running in a cube, and one of them only just got recently cut. But the reason they're honorable mentions, we'll kind of start. We'll kick off. The first one we wanted to just mention briefly is food. This kind of really, like, food's obviously been around for a little bit of time. It kind of came out in Eldraine, but then it got a bunch more cards in the Lord of the Rings set. There's some very powerful hobbits that kind of really make a lot more food and kind of let you do more with it. Like this Peregrine Took that 2 and a green for a 2/3. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead, and it has sack 3 foods to draw a card. So food isn't just a life gainy thing now. It is an engine as well. You can actually do stuff with it. There's also some very cool food combos involving cards like Experimental Confectioneer. It's effectively you just make infinite food and kind of go ham that way. The main reason that this is an honorable mention is that food tends to be Abzan. The Confectioneer I just mentioned is a black card, as are a bunch of the hobbits as well that you want to be running. So we're trying to keep this Selesnya, so therefore food doesn't technically get in, even though the majority of the deck is Selesnya. You are kind of splashing black for it as well. Yeah,
food is cool. It's nice in that it can play in quite different ways. There's a lot of combo potential there, but you can also just run people over pretty quickly with. It's just not difficult to pump out food at a pretty alarming rate, and once you get that going, you sort of need only 1 or 2 things that actually pay you off of that to snowball some games pretty quickly, So yeah, I think the food deck has a lot of potential. It's tough to make it work in, your super cutthroat vintage cube, but I think most cubes below that, you can, if you're willing to commit a bunch of slots to making food work, you can definitely do it.
Yeah, and it has the nice thing of it does over, like, there's also a bunch of decks nowadays that just want an amount of artifacts, and food will slot in there as an amount of artifacts, but then you have the decks that actually care about it, which is quite nice. And also, obviously, we're a few months before The Hobbit comes out, the next Lord of the Rings set. I would expect there to be a couple of hobbits in the set called The Hobbit. Hey-ho. The next one that's an honorable mention we want to touch on is persist combos. This is also generally Abzan, or sometimes even going into like 4 colors, in like 4 color, like going into red as well. We've touched on persist combos a bunch of times in the course of this podcast. I think our general consensus is, in theory, it's good, but struggles to come together a lot of the time. I think the main issue with, like, effectively with persist combos, you are playing a creature with persist. That is a creature that when it dies, it comes back to the creature. It comes back to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. You are combining that with a way of either not putting the counter on it or negating the counter. So something like Grumgully the Generous puts a counter on non-humans when they enter. So +1/+1 counters and -1/-1 counters cancel each other out. So if you have a sack outlet, you can infinitely sack your persist creature if you have an effect that's cancelling it out. Generally, these tend to be 3, sometimes 4 card combos. It has all the bits. It has all the redundancy. I just haven't found the cube where it works. Probably it is more like a budget cube looking for combos or a more mid-rangey cube. But again, it's base Selesnya a lot of the time, but you are generally splashing into black for sack outlets or often red for either a persist creature that actually kills them in Murderous Redcap or a way of putting counters on things as well. So it's not a true Selesnya deck as we're trying to talk about today.
Yeah, for sure. It would be quite unusual, I think, actually, to be straight Selesnya if you're doing that stuff, because black is just going to give you a lot of powerful options in terms of finding your combo, and the sack outlets is obviously a really big part of it. They can be powerful, though. I like it more if it's part of a sort of bigger creature combo package where you have, your worldy tutors and your birthing pods and lots of ways to go and find all these pieces. I don't really like it if it's just like, I've got, I put a few pieces of a few copies of each piece of the combo in there, but you not really the ways to assemble it. I think then it gets a bit tough.
Yeah, I think you generally have to commit if you want to do persist combos. But one thing I do like about it, which we will come kind of talk about the flip side about this when we are talking about some other ones in Selesnya a bit later on, is that with persist combos, they are all at least trying to do the same thing. And I do like the linear nature of, I am trying to get a persist creature and something to negate the counter and a sack outlet. I know the pieces I'm looking for. That is quite nice. But we'll get into that in the episode proper in a minute. But the last one I want to touch on is what I'm currently running in my old bordered Boomer Cube, which is Threshold. It cares about having 7 or more creatures in your graveyard. I really like this deck. It's really cool. You get to run awesome cards like Werebear, Mystic Crusader, and Mystic Enforcer. These are really cool cards that effectively get better when you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. The issue with it is that it's very 2001. This was like a good deck then. If you have cards from, if your cube has any cards from a Modern Horizons set, I don't think you can do Threshold. That's probably even pushing it. I think like if you have,
I think that's a very generous approximation of the power level of this deck. I think it's really easy to tell if you can play Thresholds. Right, look at your cube. Are there cards from the last 20 years in there? If yes, don't run Thresholds because.
Right, okay.
No, I think it's cool that, yes. in the old border Boomer Cube thing. I think that's sweet. The problem is it just takes so long to get to 7 cards. Like, it's not like you tend to mill yourself that aggressively in
and you just play
white.
Magic. You ramp. Yeah, you play a Rampant Growth, play a Sword, something like that. You're
exactly.
You're
so, like,
there.
my payoff is going to be that, like, by turn 10, my creature has +1/+1,
I think you'll find Werebear gets +3/+3, James.
Okay, I acknowledge that. And, if you're in the Boomer Cube, then that's a big deal, right?
Yes, it is.
If you have cards from more recent times, then they laugh at your 3/3 and they don't really care. No, very fair. But yeah, I would agree. That is why it is an honourable mention, because I made the list. That is reasonable.
Cool. But let's actually jump into our episode proper. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through a bunch of different archetypes that we think can make Selesnya work. Like, they are things that can make it tick and can give Selesnya an identity to actually do something cool. The first one is kind of a bit of a classic. It's Go Wide. It's Go Wide tokens. So there's a couple of ways you can play this deck. I'm going to talk about one first, and then James is going to touch on another one in a moment. The classic one is, or when I think of Go Wide tokens, and this is probably my age showing here, is play a bunch of things that make tokens. So some classic ones that currently see play is like Secure the Wastes. X and a white, instant, create X, 1/1 white warrior creature tokens. You have cards like Scoop Swarm, like it's like landfall, make a creature. You have Jacked Rabbit, is a very good Rabble Master. Like there's Adeline, there's a bunch of good token makers. You're kind of combining that with your classic Overrun effect. So the OG Overrun is Overrun. 2 green, 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 sorcery, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. That is a very classic way of winning games of Magic. Like when I was a kid, that is what I was doing. There are other ways you can take this deck. James, I know you wanted to touch on some alternative ways of doing this.
Yeah, so I think the Go Wide deck is cool. The thing I always worry about it with that deck, though, putting it into a cube, is especially, in more sort of mid to high power level cube, they often see Selesnya as tokens, and then you draft it, and it's just like, sure, I mean, it's a tokens deck, and my Adeline is making tokens while it kills you, but really we're being a beatdown deck more than a tokens deck. I think it's hard to make people actually really commit to the tokens bit, rather than just attacking with their good creatures. And I think one way you can go about trying to do that, right, and make it really distinct is have some payoffs for making tokens that aren't just pumping them, right? So stuff like ways to make your tokens tap for mana. So things like Song of Freylis or Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, is one I really like. That's 2 and a green for 2/3 tokens you control have tap to add a green. Or ways to convert your tokens into cards, like Skull Clamp is the most powerful, but there are certainly plenty of others. Or just to tap your tokens for additional effects, but it's and I think it can give it a slightly different flavor for maybe Selesnya decks that we're used to, and it really pushes you to play, rather than the cheap, efficient token makers, go into some of the really big token makers too. Things like March of the Multitudes, or a card I quite like looking into this deck was I think it's called Queen Elenel of, I'm going to pronounce that word, Rudach, and
I'll go with
probably
that.
Be wrong.
Yeah, I like that. No. Commit to it. You're good.
Yeah. So this is green, white for star, power and toughness equal to number of creatures you control. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, create an additional 1/1 white soldier. So this isn't, it's not a self-contained engine, right? It doesn't do anything if you're not making tokens outside of this. But if you are making tokens already, this sort of is a force multiplier on that. So I like that sort of card that makes people commit to the tokens thing a little bit more,
No, I do like that way of doing it, because effectively because the classic issue with the Overrun version is if you don't draw your Overrun, you're kind of a bit buggered. And there are versions on creatures, there's End-Race Forerunners as well that kind of do it. But if your game plan is to just make a bunch of stuff and then profit from it, that is quite nice. Just having more redundancy, or just having more things to do with your tokens than just hope you have enough power and toughness to win the game in one swoop, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And this is probably, it's more for mid to low power level cubes, realistically. But I think it can be pretty fun.
No, definitely. Yeah. Go Wide is definitely a classic version of doing it. And there is another kind of downside, I think one thing classically holding this back from higher power level cubes is that there is a world where just the mono green version of playing stuff into an overrun effect, mono green was better than that and more consistent to that, because you have cards like Natural Order and Crater Hoof. You don't need that is in theory a similar game plan pushed to 11, but you don't have to actually even make tokens with that. You just play your ramp creatures. So I think that's why it probably wasn't seen as much in the higher power level cubes, but I think there's still definitely something here where Selesnya is very good at making tokens. It has a bunch of ways of abusing tokens, and it's definitely a good identity. And a bunch of the cards will go in other decks as well. Like the token makers in white will go into your Boris decks. They'll go into your mono white decks. If you're doing aristocrats, they'll go into there as well. There's good overlap in those places, basically, and I do quite like that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's always something you need, right? Because you're not going to be able to put enough token makers in if only Selesnya can use them. So you certainly need to look for those overlap decks.
No, 100%. All right, let's keep going. Our next deck we want to touch on is creature combos. So we mentioned persist specifically at the start in our honorable mentions, but this is more specifically what stuff you can do in the colors of Selesnya. You don't need to splash. You can keep your mana more efficient by just keeping it in Selesnya. So what this is trying to do is basically use the powerful creature tutors that we get in Selesnya. Selesnya has some of the best creature tutors. Like green gives us like Worldly Tutor, Green Sun Zenith, Natural Order. But we also have a card like Ella Damri's Call. This is a fantastic card for a creature combo deck because it's a green and a white. Instant, search your library for a creature card, reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. That is a fantastic effect that is very unique to Selesnya. Instant speed tutor for the thing you need at that time is very good. But when you're combining it with creature combos, it's even better because you only have to draw half your combo. If you have an Ella Damri's Call in hand, you immediately get the other half.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I quite like the creature combo thing if you really commit to it. Because I think part of the reason people struggle drafting creature combo is that it's hard to know when to take the combo pieces, you know? It's and people don't want to spec on, you know, the tutors and the birthing pods and whatnot until they have something to do with them. And you kind of just need to have enough combos in, I think, where you can feel happy just speculating on combo pieces and ways to find them and having faith that you will get something that works, you know? Like, you will fire a bunch of shots, a lot of them won't pay off, one of them will, hopefully, and then you will have a combo deck that does something, you know? But it is tricky because it's kind of asking you to almost... you know, go in blind, take halves of combos, hope it pans out, and because it does sort of invite train wreck potential, right?
Yeah, it really does. Like I love the idea of Selesnya creature combos. The kind of I think the tricky part with them is that some of them can be quite niche, if that makes sense. Like everyone or a lot of Magic players, especially ones who cube, will kind of know how Kiki Jiki Splinter Twin, those combos work, because it's quite simple. It's I put the thing on the thing, or I have these two out and they go infinite. Some of the creature-based combos in Selesnya are a bit trickier, and like stuff like Rosy Cotton and Scurry Oak, I think at least has been in like Pioneer or Modern, or like I know they are playable on Arena basically, so therefore people will see them a little bit, but like a lot of them are a bit niche, and I think one downside with it is that sometimes people don't realize their combo cards when it's going around in a draft, and I think that is one downside with creature combos in Selesnya. Like I think they're very cool, and I do agree that it's kind of like I think the way to build it is kind of like you commit to like, okay, we are doing life gain combos, or we're doing infinite token combos. I think I think mixing too many of them can lead to like when I added a bunch of creature combos to my cube the first time, like there were two players who drafted creature combos, and we both ended up with two halves of the combo. Neither of us could combo because we had the exact opposite halves of all the combos, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I put this in my dual commander cube, right? As kind of what Green White's doing, and no one has drafted it yet. I might just force it next time we draft, but because I feel like it needs to. I feel like if someone makes it work, then people will sort of see the way, you know. So I'm planting my flag 2 days before the draft. I'm in Selesnya creature combos, and I'll report back with how that goes.
No, nice. Yeah, because like. Yeah, as I was saying, I do really like the creature-based combos, and like I think like it has all the tools to be good and consistent, and it has all the redundancy as well. And I think one, again, it's a pitfall of it is that you can really go down a rabbit hole when the combos. It's like, oh, this card combos with this. Oh, but that card combos with this. And that, but like A combos with B combos with C, but A and C do nothing together.
But also, isn't that really fun? Like,
it is. It
I
is.
love that.
No. I would agree, but I think like this is very much and when we're talking about power level of cube, like normally when we talk about cards, it's kind of like what power level of cube should you run them in. This is more the experience level of playgroup, I think. Like playgroups who have a bit more experience with these type of combos or with these type of interactions will get more out of it, basically.
Yes,
because they'll commit to it. Like someone will take that devoted druid earlier because they know it combos with something else, or because it combos with a bunch of other stuff in the cube, like that kind of thing.
Yes, I think that's definitely true. I think it is fine to have like 1 or 2 decks in a cube that are a bit like that, though. You know, like if every deck's like that, and only really only people who've drafted a lot of cube are gonna know what's going on, then that's maybe a bit of a feel bad for everyone else. But I think if that's like 1 or 2 decks, that's maybe okay. You know, it adds a little bit of variety. And I think it's really fun figuring out a combo you weren't aware of mid-draft. I think that's just like one of the sweetest things that could happen in Cube, you know?
No, definitely. And it is something that I think should exist in any balanced cube, no matter what power level it is. I think combo should exist because it is a nice, like, it balances out the cube nicely, and there are people who like combos out there, and it's something for them to do. Like there's combos in every power level of cube. Like we talked about a bunch, or we talked about some that involve rares, but like there's like pauper combos, like Midnight Guard and Presence of Gond will make infinite 1/1 elf tokens. It's kind of like a worse version of Kiki Chiki Splinter Twin. Like the Scurry Oak Rosy Cotton combo is peasant legal. So that is something that is quite nice, is that you can tailor the combo to match any level of cube, and I do think Selesnya is a good home for those. But it is a tricky thing to balance, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree that I have seen this not work several times. So I've on a second iteration of it, I will report back if this is successful.
Definitely. All right, let's keep it going. We have another one that I tried in my Unpowered Cube a while ago. And it's one I really like and will get more cards going forward. But it's a cool one, and it's humans. So this is a Typal deck, and we've done a whole episode recently on running Typal Matters in cubes, and normally, when you're doing Typal Matters decks and archetypes, you want it to be in a cube where there's multiple cards that care about it. In that episode, we mentioned the one exception is humans, because a lot of cards are generally humans. If you just go through, like if you just go to Cube Cobra and filter by creature type, the majority of the creatures in the cube will be humans, and it's not hard to find easy swaps for some things that are humans, or for like to swap an elf with a human that does a similar effect. Like rather than Savannah Lions, you run Elite Vanguard, that kind of thing. You run the human version of an effect that's already there. That does exist in cube. And as a Typal Matters deck, humans is quite solid. It's got a bunch of cool effects. Like you at 1-drops, you have like Champion of the Parish, a single white for a 1/1 human soldier, and whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. You have lords with like Mayor of Averbrook or Kyla Sigardian Emissary, and like Tauren's Fist of the Angels is another cool card that when you cast a creature spell, you make a 1/1 green and white human soldier creature token with training, and it has training itself. Like, what's quite nice about this is that you can probably fit in the gold cards quite nicely to your Selesnya section, and then just a lot of the other creatures in there will naturally be humans, and it will and it can kind of give you a nice bit of synergy on top of what your cube was already doing. You won't have to change too much, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. I think it works better if you're not absolutely maxing out the power level of your cube, because then you have a bit more flexibility to pick between creatures in your white and green creature slots, and you can just say, hey, unless there's a compelling reason for this slot not to be a human, I'll pick the human option, you know? And because, as you say, it's such a abundant creature type, you can get up to a really strong number of humans without really sacrificing a lot from the other archetypes in the cube. So yeah, I think this is a good place for Selesnya to be. And you can potentially make it more of a multicolor thing as well, right? Because humans are across all the colors. You can maybe look at like payoffs in other colors as well.
No, exactly. Yeah. It is something you can sprinkle across the whole cube, but you can make Selesnya kind of really be like that's where the gold payoffs are. But yeah, you can sprinkle like there's good humans in all colors of Magic. Yeah, it is just as James was saying, it is stuff of like you might have to run like Avacyn's Pilgrim over like Ignoble Hierarch or Jorga Tree Speaker, something like that. That's kind of the like min-maxing power level. Yeah, you're right. It can't be in the most powerful cubes where you have to where everything has to be efficient. If in your cube you can run inefficient creatures for synergy purposes to make like A plus B is something more powerful than A and B individually, then that's definitely something like that's kind of where this kind of strategy can really flourish. If you have time to build an engine, so in a slower cube rather than just a more efficient kill you with my Minsk and Boo style cube.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, the next one we want to touch on is a very classic Selesnya deck, and it is Enchantress. So what we're trying to do here is play cards that reward us for playing enchantments, and then play a lot of enchantments. The classic ones here are cards that draw us cards when we either play or cast enchantments. So there's like very old Magic cards like Argothian Enchantress, 1 and a green, 0/1 with Shroud. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card. There's a bunch of basically similar versions of this effect. There's like Enchantress's Presence, Satyr Enchanter, Sithis Harvest Hand. These all draw us cards when we cast or play enchantments. So card value is very good. There's a bunch of cool things you can do with enchantments. There's some very there's after like from around Theros block. There's cards that get buffed up. So like Successant Champion gets bigger whenever we play an enchantment, and we draw a card as well. So you're kind of really doing a lot of stuff there. I quite like enchantments. It can be very all in though. James, before I kind of talk about some of my less positive views on Enchantress, like what do you think about it first of all?
Yeah, I think Enchantress is really cool, and it's something I would love to be able to do in Cube. Because it's very like iconic thing for Selesnya to be doing as well, right? Like it's what it does in a lot of like interesting older formats. The cards are all dope. Like Sarah's Sanctum's an awesome card. Enchantress's Presence, I'll go for Enchantress. But it's a really cool engine that you can get going. I find it mostly doesn't work in Cube. It can work, but you just have to commit so many slots, you know?
Yeah.
It's really tough. And the reason is, right, that, you know, like artifact decks work really well in lots of cubes. And, you know, you might look at, you know, Sarah's Sanctum, Tolarian Academy. These are kind of the same cards, right?
Basically the same thing.
A different card type. And we can certainly make Tolarian Academy work. But the difference is, right, that if you weren't trying to make artifacts work in a cube, you would still have a really big chunk of artifacts in there because there are loads of them that are just really good. And you're just naturally going to end up with way fewer enchantments in a cube. And that means you have to dedicate more cards specifically for this deck. You just aren't going to get that same density, the required density otherwise. And you know what? Enchantress's Presence, if you only have like 6 enchantments in your deck, is not very good. So yeah, for me, this just like asks for too many slots most of the time. I think to make it work, you'd need to find other decks which care about enchantments, and that seems challenging to me.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, enchantments is it is a parasitic archetype. Like it just requires so many slots to get any kind of synergy. There are ways of making it overlap, but then it is more niche cubes basically. It's like there's like Boggles in Simic, or there's Heroic in Boros. Like there's a world where enchantments does best when you're doing like a souped up Theros block cube, where just like in those sets, they had to make creatures be enchantments to make the draft environment work, and like there just aren't enough good ones to make it exist in a regular cube. And also there is the world where kind of like the power outliers, like the cards you really want to play, like Argothian Enchantress and Sarah's Sanctum and a bunch of these other cards, they're really expensive because they're very popular in Commander. And it's like there's a world where kind of like this would be great in like a budget or a lower powered level cube, but are you going to spend the money on a Sarah's Sanctum? It's probably like a couple £100 now. Are you going to spend that money on one of these cards to go into your lower powered level cube? You could proxy it, love that, but yeah, it would struggle when it's until they transition from everything making an artifact token to everything making a enchantment token. We're kind of at the point where it's a bit trickier.
Yeah, for sure. Cheapest Sarah's Sanctum currently $480.
How much?
$480.
Jesus.
Bit tough. But yeah, you can...
I didn't buy one when I got into Magic because it was like, £40, that's a bit much. I remember that.
Yeah, it would have been a strong investment, yeah.
I traded my fetch lands away instead. I'm very good at Magic.
Yeah, strong. This is why we do not provide financial advice.
Yeah, I'm much better at building cubes than I am with finances. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I think so. Shrines are something you could do, right?
Shrines are tight. I do like that. Yes, shrines are enchantment.
And there's loads of shrines now. You know, they keep printing new ones.
So I have so Shrines tends or for a long while was the 5-color deck in like Peasant cubes. That's mainly where I've played Shrines. Some of them are very oppressive.
Yes. Yeah, you need it to be in a power level of cube that isn't just going to where everyone doesn't just fold to you having 3 shrines in play, right? But yeah, maybe that's like a thing that you could do to flesh out your enchantment numbers and
I do like that. Yeah.
Get that critical mass in there, you know?
Yeah,
maybe you have like that and you have some sort of auras matters theme and you can make something work.
Yeah, hold on. We can do this. So if we have auras, heroic aggro in Boros, we have play as many enchantments as possible in Selesnya, we have 5-color shrines, Hondons, and blue-white parallax tide stuff.
That sounds sick.
That sort of works. I mean, but there I've just listed 4 different decks, and I think that's where this deck is good. That's kind of the build around we are having to work towards to make this strategy work, I think.
Yes, yeah. You've got to put a lot of effort in for sure.
Commit to the bit. This next one though, I think is a bit easier to fit in, and it's one that I've run versions of this in my unpowered cube for a while, and I quite liked it. I thought it did solidly. It was a very solid. So my cube was quite high powered level at the time, and it was a solid 2-1 deck. I think in a lower power level cube, this would really do well, and it's effectively Watch Wolf matters, or like it's like the Watch Wolf deck. Basically, what we're trying to do is spend 2 mana on 3/3s, and that's it. No, there is more. Like we're trying to play creatures with more power than mana, turn them sideways, and then use the disruptive cards that we get in like white things like Mother of Runes and Voice of Resurgence to help us kind of have a bit more interaction, help us push damage through. So like we're running cards like we're probably not going as deep as actual Watch Wolf. That is a white. That is a green and a white for a 3/3 wolf. We're going more Fleecemane Lion. That is the same thing, but it's a cat, therefore better. With 3 green and a white with Monstrosity 1, which means if it isn't monstrous, you can pay that mana, put a counter on it, and it becomes monstrous. And then as long as it is monstrous, it has a hexproof and indestructible. Like there's a bunch of other effects like this. There's like Bronzehide Lion. And this is something that goes quite nicely with the green side of things, like because green has a bunch of threats that are around the 3-4 mana mark that are very powerful. Like I really like Earthsign Monstrosity. That's been a really cool one recently. It's 3 mana for a 3/3 with Trample that basically says when it attacks mill a card, it gets +1/+1 for each types of cards in your graveyard. and is indestructible.
It has some multiplayer matters text. In normal 2-player Magic, it just has to attack.
It just has to attack, but it's indestructible and gets a +1/+1 for each card type in your graveyard and has trample. So like that card's been really good, and like that's the kind of creature that we want. It's a 3-drop that we can ramp out earlier with one of our mana dorks that green gives us. We just hit for a bunch of damage as quickly as possible, and then we have the good removal in white to mop up anything that we need to. Like, this is kind of, I think, the closest to Boros aggro as we kind of know it now in like the Arena Cube or the Mega Image. This is the closest specifically to that, because you're just playing good, efficient creatures and trying to get them across the line that way, basically.
Yeah, this seems good. It's interesting, right, in that it wants a very different selection of green cards than a lot of decks. Like this, we're explicitly saying we're about playing a 2-drop on turn 2. We therefore presumably don't want our Elvish Mystic on turn 1. We want our 1-drop to be something that attacks or gets bigger. I think this would be a good home for something like, do you remember Pelt Collector?
Ooh, I do like Pelt Collector.
Yeah. That seems like a very nice way to get this curve started. This seems good. Green stompy stuff with white removal. Can't imagine it goes wrong.
No, exactly. And it is something that just like, I don't know, like Boros has got a bunch of love from Modern Horizons and like ancillary products. This is very easily a strategy that just like they print a couple of good green creatures or a couple of good white creatures and kind of like it can kind of really pull it together. But like at the moment, from a power level point of view, it is not as good as the Boros version of this deck. Like it just doesn't have the power outliers like Fourth Aelingus. What's the bloody dog called that I hate? Comet. Yeah. But I do like dogs. I like dogs. I just hate. I just hate Comet Stellar Pup. Worth pointing out. And then is it Athari? Is also quite a powerful Boros card. I don't think we have things that are that power level. So, but like one tier below that from a power level point of view, I think this deck is quite good.
Yeah, it seems fine. I think you need to sort of make a conscious effort, not just in the Selesnya gold cards, but in your green cards to have enough that lean aggressive, right?
Like Hex Drinker we're running.
Figure of Fables, a bit of a banger from the most recent set.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it seems very solid.
Marvelous. All right. Our last two are kind of, they start at the same nucleus, but then they do diverge. The first one is the fairer version, and it's the fairer version of +1/+1 counters. This is a very classic Selesnya strategy that does overlap nicely with things like persist combos. You're putting your counters on them. That is maybe where this could see play. It does also go nicely with like go wide decks, because if you can make your whole board get bigger with one spell, that's quite nice. But effectively what the strategy is trying to do is play cards that put counters onto our creatures, and then in this version we're trying to have cards that reward us for having counters on our creatures. So like a card like Biophagus is a 2-mana mana dork that taps from mana, and if you cast a creature, puts a counter on a creature. You have cards like Ajani Steadfast. It's a planeswalker that has a -2 of put a +1 counter on each creature you control. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to spread out as many counters as possible. We're then trying to synergize that with cards like Abzan Falconer, as an example. It's a card that's 2 and a white for a 2/3 with Outblast. Don't worry about it, it's terrible. But each creature you control with a +1 counter on it has flying. So it's a way of pushing damage through. There's a bunch of effects like that. There's like Pride Malkin, which is a cat that gives all of our creatures with +1 counters trample. Like, this is more for lower power level cubes where you're trying to do some cool bits of synergy, but this is a very solid thing that Selesnya has always able to do well with. And there's a bunch of cool effects that can really kind of tie everything together. Cards like Harden Scales, single green for an enchantment. If one or more +1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1 counters +1 are put on it instead. If you don't have a bunch of creatures that care about +1 counters, Harden Scales does nothing. But if you're really committing to the bit, Harden Scales is a very powerful card. Effectively, it's a doubling season for 1 mana. That can be very strong. And That is one downside of the deck, potentially, where you may need to run, and it's one reason why it will struggle in higher power level cubes, where you need to be more efficient, because Hardened Scales and the Ozolith are really cool cards, but they don't attack or block, and you can't pack a deck with them. You need to be like these going cubes where you have time to, again, you can take a turn off to play an engine piece and not just get run over. But it is very cool. I do like this. The strategy. It is a classic one for Commander, and the overlap with combos, I think, can be quite nice.
I was very upset with what you said about Outlast.
Outlast is dreadful.
Clearly
I will read
not
Outlast.
drafted enough Abzan decks in Khans of Tarkir.
I did, and my wife ran me over with them. But you know what ran me over? The Siege Rhino, not an Outlast creature. Outlast is... So I will read Outlast. So Abzan Falconer also has Outlast. It is Outlast for a white, and that means you pay a white and tap it, put a counter on this creature. Outlast only as a sorcery. So you have to untap with the creature, then on one of your main phases, tap it to put a counter on it.
I'm not saying it's the quickest thing in the world, but, you get a counter. Counters are great. Clearly never activated an Einok Bondkin.
I have, that's why. I have. That's why I'm against it. It's like, I have to tap my creature? And sorcery speed,
have a little patience. This is 2016 Magic. We're happy to hang around for 5 turns before our creatures attack anyone.
No, Outlast is the one mechanic I want Modern Horizoned. Let me do it. Let me do it at instant speed. That would be tight. That would be good.
Instant speed with haste.
Yeah. Maybe not the haste, but just so I can do it while blocking. But anyway, no, James, rabbit hole. Come on, let's break it out.
So,
talk to me about counters, the fairer version of the +1 on counter deck.
Yeah, I think this deck is good. A lot of the reason is that there's loads of really good cards which just put +1/+1 counters on stuff that you'd run anyway. Your Luminarch Aspirants and whatnot. It seems like we get another version of that card every set, and they're all pretty good. The Talent, I think, is really good in Keeper's Talent. The bit I have struggled with this deck, because I've seen people try it in a bunch of cubes, and they always have the Hardened Scales in there. And I always end up thinking you don't actually want to play the Hardened Scales, Because, I'd rather just have more of the creatures that create the counter. I want more creatures and more ways to put counters on them, and the Hardened Scales feels a little bit win more, But I would like to get it to a stage where you actually want the Hardened Scales. I think that would be cool. Stuff like the Conclave Mentor is really good, though, because that's Hardened Scales, but also a body which you can put the counters on,
It can attack and block and can take a counter itself, yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I think this deck is solid, and it's certainly one where you can be very committed to the counters thing or only slightly committed to the counters thing, and they both work.
No, definitely. And what's nice about this is that we have mentioned some rares, we've mentioned some mythics, and we've mentioned plenty of commons and uncommons. This really can go into any, from the most budget pauper cube all the way up to a decent power level. What's the highest power level cube you think this could be? Like the fairer version could be running. Because it's probably there up to cards that are running to modern power level cubes to an extent.
I always think the whole this way we used to classify cubes as modern cube or legacy cube model kind of fell down when, because all the Forfalingus or whatever is, I guess not but Psychic Frog is in modern cube, right? But it's kind of a busted card. I wouldn't put it in cubes with Psychic Frog, but I would put it in cubes with a bunch. I think mid to high power level cube this is fine, but probably not full blown. Here's all my Modern Horizons cards cube.
Yeah. If you're not running all the efficient cards, and if you're planning on winning around turn 8, I think is where we're going with that. You have fetch lands, but you don't have jewels.
Turn 8 sounds like a booster draft to me.
Does it? All right, 6 to 8.
Yeah.
Turning up the power level a little bit, let's talk about what I think is probably the best thing you can do with Selesnya right now, and this is the one that has the closest chance of being respectable in a vintage cube, and this is the Landfall +1/+1 counter mashup deck. I'm gonna plant my flag and say, I think this is the best thing you can do in Selesnya in 2026. Basically, the plan is to play good cards. But wait, there's more. We're going to play good cards that synergize with counters and lands coming into play. It's not running cards for synergy's sake. It's not running underpowered level, like it's not running any underpowered cards when we don't have room for hardened scales or the regular Ozolith. We are just running cards that are going to synergize and do cool things and kill our opponents, or they're powerful. So the key cards in this deck are cards like Bristly Bill, Scythecat Cub, like Badger Mole Cub, Fast Bond, cards like Tifa Lockhart. These are kind of where we are. They're kind of like they are 1 to 3 mana, and they're just incredibly powerful cards that you would run in effectively most green or white decks. When you combine them and you get the extra level of synergy with things like Fast Bond, with things that maybe we're playing lands from our graveyard as well. Maybe we're going to add a Strip Mine into here. It combines to be way more powerful. You have cool utility. You have things like Knight of the Reliquary to go and search for some cool lands that are in our deck as well. It's just an extra level of power, an extra level of utility, and effectively you are playing the powerful cards that green and white have right now. So, like, I'll read Scythecat Cub. This is effectively, it's a very similar thing to Bristly Bill, but it's 1 and a green for a 2/2 cat with trample. Has landfall. Whenever land you control enters, put a +1 counter on target creature you control. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, double the number of +1 counters on that creature instead. It's this whole kind of thing of like, we play a cheap threat and it gets bigger. This is kind of like what Tarmogoyf looks like now in 2026. It's this kind of deck.
Yeah, I agree that this is one of the better things you could be doing if you were playing Selesnya in a powered cube now. I think the thing I sort of struggle to call this, we fixed Selesnya though, because to me this is what green's doing. And if white is the thing that's open with my green deck, then I'll play some good white cards for it, and that'll work well, and that'll be good. But if it was red that was open with it, or if it was blue that was open with it, then I would be playing the good cards in those colors, and that green core package I think would still work. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that the white is essential to make this strategy good, right? It's the white cards can be good in it, but those roles can be played by cards of other colors as well. So I think what I'm saying is this is certainly a way you can draft Selesnya and have it work out in a powerful cube. But I think it is not as well defined as the identities that some other color pairs will have in those cubes, like you look at the say like a Boros deck, that's it's those is two colors like amplifying each other in a really coherent way, right? Or they or say like a blue-black combo deck, like both colors are contributing a lot and are like essential to the things that you can do in that deck. I really feel like that's the case in most of the Selesnya decks in those cubes. It feels like most of the time, if I'm drafting Selesnya in those cubes, it's it's either this where I'm really leaning into the core good stuff that green is doing, which is around the land stuff. Like Bristly Bill's great, Scythecat Cub's great, all that stuff is really strong. And then I'll sprinkle in some good white cards because I got some good white cards because it was open in the draft, and there might be some little bits of synergy there, but it's not like, it doesn't feel like a super coherent overall strategy that the white is necessary for. Or sometimes it's the other way around, right? Sometimes I'm sort of doing the white aggro thing, and but my white cards are a little bit bigger, so I'm going to play a few mana dorks, and maybe I'll chuck a questing beast or whatever in there, right? By more leaning into what white is doing. And I've still struggled to find a place in those cubes where I am like Selesnya and those two, and it's really the two colors amplifying each other, you know?
So I see what you're saying. I think it is the counters is where you can get that added level of synergy, and I think it's something that might not be fully represented in the arena or the Mitgo cube as it is now. But like, I think there is definitely synergy there that you can make it work. So running additional cards like Luminarch Aspirant, the one that puts a counter on a creature at the start of combat, that goes nicely with cards like Bristly Bill or Selesyna or like the Uroboid. Like, that's another way of taking the counters. Like, that's where I've seen it be quite good. Like, the Uroboid is it's 2 green for a 1/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X+ on counters on each creature you control, where X is this creature's power. So I admit that I have just given another green card to say why I think it's really why this works. But like, have it like white has so many consistent ways of putting counters on things. Like I love the landfall stuff that comes with Bristly Bill and Selesyna, but the white ones are more consistent. They are putting a counter on something every turn, and that's where I think you can get that synergy of, because like sometimes you don't have that fetch land to kind of make your creature bigger with the Bristly Bill, but like, I think guaranteed ways of counters of just growing your board every turn, I think is, and I think that kind of that part, it for me is where the overlap to a higher power level is basically.
I think Overvoid is actually a really good example, because it is a card that gets better when you have other things making counters, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's the bit that's missing for me often in these decks. Like, like Luminarch Aspirant, Bristly Bill, Sidecrackle, these are all good cards that do put counters on things. But I still often wouldn't call it a counters deck, because don't really feel like I'm not playing stuff that needs the counters, especially, you know, those cards are just doing the thing they do, outputting power and toughness. But it's not actually important that it's in the form that I have those threats outputting power and toughness rather than something else, right? It's not like I have specific things that are synergizing with the counters. I'm just making my creatures big and attacking. Whereas Void actually does benefit more directly from the counters, because if you can pump your Void, then that is going to snowball really, really quickly because it keys off its own power. So that, I think that's a good example. Maybe that's the answer. You need like a few more things like that actively benefit from getting the counters, rather than just my Bristly Bill makes my Bristly Bill big and I attack with it, you know?
No, definitely. That makes sense. Yeah. I've had a lot of fun with the big with the Uroboid, but yeah. I do see that level of that. Like, a lot of cards I mentioned have been green being really strong. Why do you need? Yeah, why do you need the white? But yeah, I do think with the consistency, and I do think that with the added level of interaction, white does pair with it quite well. But like, that does bring us on to kind of like, with that deck, one thing that I do think Selesnya has quite nicely to it, and I think this is the deck that kind of gets the most use out of it, is because this is the deck that runs the most fetch lands. Like, the deck with Bristly Bill and the deck with Selesyna is the one that wants to run the most fetch lands. That works really well with splashing. So it means you can splash that Nardu, which works really nicely with ways of targeting it, like this deck. Or you can run like a Renin 6 to help get you Strip Mine back, because you can do that type of stuff in this deck. So yeah, I think that's generally quite strong.
Yeah, for sure. It's it can be a nice base 2-color pair to play a lot more colors.
Right, yeah, we're kind of coming to the end of the episode. Hopefully there's been some good ideas there for people who are struggling to find what Selesnya's identity is in their cubes. I know it's something that we both definitely struggled with over the years. And I know stuff like counters, stuff like tokens are more widely known in terms of archetypes you can do in Selesnya, but stuff like Watchwolves I think is really powerful and is definitely worth a try if you're in like a mid-powered cube and you're struggling to work out what to do. I think Enchantress is very cool in the right cube. It all comes down to finding that overlap, finding what works best for your cube. Who knows? Maybe it's Threshold, everyone. Maybe that was the answer all along.
You heard it here first.
If you have any other any other archetypes that you found to work really well in Selesnya, do let us know. The easiest way is in the YouTube comments. Again, we're working on a way of getting a bit more direct interaction with everyone. But yeah, that would definitely be a good way to pass over any feedback. All right, James, I think that's where we're going to leave it today. Thank you very much, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Nice one. All right. Yeah, as we said at the start, please give the podcast a 5-star review, thumbs up, all that good stuff greatly helps us out. Until next time, when it will actually be our Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set review, the cards will be spoiled by the time we record that one. It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.